Hi, it's Ted Asregadoo. Welcome to Truthout TV. My guest is Mark Karlin. He is the editor of BuzzFlash at Truthout, and he's written a commentary about guns, sexual insecurity, entitlement, and profit that's generating a lot of heated discussion in the comments section of his commentary, and he is here to talk about what he wrote. Hello, Mark. Welcome to Truthout TV.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Now, you don't mince words in this commentary. You basically say that white males want guns as a symbol and as a weapon of power. And you go even further and you say it's basically an extension of their phallus.
That's right. I think too often we focus on this issue as a political issue. Right now in the Senate, they're talking about checks on buyers in terms of the background before they can buy a gun. But really, this is a social, cultural, political issue and psychological. Psychological, I do believe that guns represent, to many males, I'm not talking about all gun owners, but sexuality. I think there's a cultural component that the gun, and Tom Hartman wrote this in a very popular article on Truthout, I think it got over 120,000 views, that guns were used very often to catch runaway slaves, that there were these bands of plantation owners and whites who would prowl the South and use guns to catch runaway slaves. So I think there's an entitlement issue here. And I think finally there's the power issue. The gun is the ultimate power individually between life and death, which is to say, if I have a gun and I shoot someone and shoot them in a vital organ, I can kill them. So there's power involved. And it's a tremendous psychological power. The fact that it is also symbolic of an extended phallus, I think adds to that, and particularly to the white male. And we are talking about white males here because if we look at massacres at the movie theaters, whether they're in Aurora, Colorado, or an elementary school such as Sandy Hook, we're not talking about women doing this. We're not talking about blacks doing this, Mexicans doing this. We're talking about white males, and particularly in the latter half of 2012, all the massacres, major massacres that occurred were committed with assault rifles, the AR-15, and specifically in all four. That was the common denominator, plus that there were white males.
Yeah, and you talked about Tom Hartman, and I did interview him for Truthout TV about that article that he wrote on Truthout. When I was talking to him, I referenced a Mother Jones piece that stated that the NRA and the gun industry keep their own economy in the black through a very, very powerful weapon, and that is fear. Fear of gun grabbers, fear of Obama, fear of liberals, fear of crime, fear of the other, you name it. It is the specter of this big bad that is great for business for the gun industry.
Absolutely true, because if you look at how few incidents guns actually prevent in terms of crime, and the fact that most of the white gun owners who are rabid champions of the gun, and I call this a cult because really it is the cult of the gun, they live in places in suburbs and rural areas where there's very little crime. They don't need them for crime. And yet they're saying, I need these so desperately for self-defense. In fact, many of them need them so desperately they have 30 or 35 of them. The sales of guns as far as the number of people has gone down in recent years, but the number of guns sold per person has gone up. It's a very curious statistic, and it indicates that many gun owners are interested in the power of the gun, in having different models, the latest, more lethal models, the assault weapons. There's even the 50 caliber sniper rifle, which is easily available in most states. So I definitely agree with Tom Hartman.
The interesting thing about these, about the gun massacres and how they're perpetrated by white males, they tend to be preying on people who are completely defenseless whether it's in a school or a movie theater, somehow that they're in a situation where it's almost like there's going to be no resistance to this violent act from the perpetrator because it happens on such a in such a surprising way. Now, I was thinking about, as you were talking about the sense of identity, what it means to be a white male in society. And identity in general is rooted in the difference in others. It's estimated that the people who I self-identify as white in 30 to 40 years is going to be reduced to about 74 to 75% of the population. However, that number may change because more and more people may identify with more than one race. If this happens, how do you think it will affect this sort of gun obsession that we're seeing today? Let's say more and more people identify themselves not as, say white or African American or Asian, but they start checking off more and more boxes. And so the identity, in a sense, becomes a little bit more broadened. It's not so narrowly focused, and you don't feel like, oh, I'm so caged in and I have to defend myself against that big bad other out there. Do you think that this is a possibility as our country becomes essentially more multicultural through people marrying one another of different races?
My answer to that is that what we're seeing right now is the Alamo effect. Whites, particularly white males who used to control a basically patriarchal white society, are feeling very endangered by those multiple checkoff boxes that you're referring to, which is to say that they, in the last 50 years, have seen a sharing of power with blacks. And so when Barack Obama was elected in 2008, there was a run on assault weapons and bullets. They had to share power with whites with women. And so now white males are working for women very often. They're their bosses, and they weren't used to that. They saw Latinos move into positions of power in society. And there can be nothing more symbolic, as I mentioned a moment ago, than having an African-American president. When Tom Hartman talked about these slave posses with guns, and that this was really the basis of the Second Amendment, what we see now is a complete revolt, because what could be more threatening to the white male than a black male as president? After all, blacks used to be chattel in the United States. And until the civil rights movement, were treated as second-class citizens. So the symbol of the gun against the other is far more important than what the gun actually can do in society, other than cause grievous harm, death, and injury. But it doesn't do much for the white male other than, as I say, offer psychological reassurance. Politically, it doesn't really mean much.
Right. I think that when we talk about politically, even economically, I was thinking about a book that Joan Walsh, who's the editor of Salon, recently wrote, and when she talks about the shrinking middle class. And I'm wondering, do you think that some of this paranoid sexual inadequacy, the sense of entitlement among a certain sector of white males, it will recede if the distribution of wealth weren't so tilted towards the 1%. That is, if there was a more broadened distribution of wealth and people felt like they were as in middle class folks, felt like that they were, quote, making it, that they weren't, living paycheck to paycheck or just falling behind every year, that this sense of tension and rage against others would somehow recede.
That's a strong possibility, although not a certainty, because one sense of being patriarchal, providing for the family, is certainly very important in terms of those white males who are now unemployed and see the gun as in a way, their last vestige of manhood from a symbolic power standpoint. They may not have a job, but they have a gun, and the gun gives them power. So yes, perhaps if we had a better distribution of jobs and a fairer system of income to the 99%, we might see less frustration, less fear, less anger and bitterness. I think you, in a way, are asking a question that leads to an answer that also applies to the Tea Party, and there's a strong crossover between the Tea Party and the gun rights movement, a very strong crossover, which is many in the Tea Party are angry at the government because this is what the Koch brothers and Dick Armey have told them is the source of their problems, when really the source of their problems is they've been left behind by a corporate economy that's gone global, their jobs overseas. So to answer your question, the white male then who has lost his job needs someone to be angry at, and Americans for Prosperity and other organizations have been very successful at channeling that anger toward the government rather than toward the corporations who have left them behind. And so these white males feel that the gun is all they've got left.
And it's almost an American pastime to be angry at the government, since that's an easy button to push. And I think people are more than willing to take the bait and say, oh, I see, it's not really the problem that my paycheck shrinks year after year because cost of living goes up, but my wages aren't keeping pace with inflation. The company I work for isn't treating me too well, or if I'm not getting a job or I can't find a job, it's because corporations are either outsourcing jobs or they're trying to make do with what they've got in house and make the workers that they have just do more jobs than themselves. So they're not seeing that economic picture. Instead, it's government spending, and it's the people who are the moochers in society that are taking everything away from me. That seems to be an easier narrative to swallow for a lot of people than what I sketched before.
Absolutely, and that's because billions of dollars are being tossed into these organizations that feed these myths and factoids to people that aren't true, and that includes Fox Television. And Glenn Beck was a tremendous example of this, still is, but not on Fox anymore, where he turned his rage at the government, but somehow also managed to persuade these people that capitalism was a cure when in many ways they had been abandoned by the capitalist system as we know it for cheaper jobs overseas, so that profits for these companies, these global companies, could be increased. I think the gun emotionally and psychologically for the white male becomes the last refuge of what many of them feel they have lost in society. And so therefore their intensity of feeling and passion may seem irrational to us, but to them it's a basic symbol of surviving as a white male in a society that's becoming increasingly multicultural.
All right, Mark, I want to thank you very much for being a guest on Truthout TV.
Thank you.
Mark Karlin, he's the editor of BuzzFlash at Truthout, and he, as I said, my guest on Truthout TV. Thanks for watching. I'm Ted Asregadoo.